Hello, hello, hello. I'm being told to wait. Now I'm being told to go. Hello. And welcome to the 11th annual MSU Comics Forum. My name is Ryan Clater. I'm the professor of the Comics Studio courses in the Michigan State University Department of Art, History, and Design, and I'm the director of this event. And before we get started, you may have noticed that you're experiencing this event and many others associated with the MSU Comics Forum, whether in person or streaming online, absolutely free. And I'd like to take a moment to recognize the campus and community entities who, through their contributions, allow this to happen. So, starting with our bronze sponsors, the Michigan State University Libraries, and they are the new home to the Michigan State University's Comics Forum, so thank you for having us here. We love our new space so far, yes. ERD Printing, who did the immaculate printing on the posters of Lucy Knisley's illustrated 2018 Comics Forum poster. And the Michigan State University Comic Art and Graphic Novel Podcast, which, if you did not know, is a monthly podcast that's available for free at this lovely URL. Our silver sponsors are the Residential College of Arts and Humanities and the MSU Special Collections Library, home to the largest public collection of comics in the world, and it's right here in this building. Yes. Capital Area District Libraries is our local library branch, and they are giving away a Kindle Fire tomorrow. So if you come back to Artist Alley, you've got a chance to win that for absolutely free. And Matrix, the Center for Digital Humanities and Social Sciences here at Michigan State University, hosts our website. Thank you very much. MSU Muslim Studies, who hosted a book discussion and lecture last night on the Arab of the Future. Thank you so much for hosting one of our events. And Gary Hoppenstand, who has been a longtime supporter of comic studies and pop culture studies at MSU. Gary, thank you so much. And our gold sponsors, the Journal of Popular Culture, the Department of Art, History, and Design, and the MSU Department of English, both of those of whom are part of the interdisciplinary MSU Comic Art and Graphic Novel minor. So we have a new minor here at MSU that has classes in both art and English departments. And I'd also like to thank our new platinum sponsor, the College of Arts and Letters. And all of these folks have helped us put on this event and all others associated with the MSU Comics Forum. So please, let's give them a hand. And I'd also like to take a moment to mention one of our sponsors, who is another convention here in town, the Capital City Comic Con, and I'm going to turn this over to Christina DeJong, who is going to have an exciting announcement for us.
An exciting announcement, yes. Thank you, Ryan, and thanks everyone. What a great turnout. I'm so happy to be here. I'm a professor on campus as well. I love comics, but I'm a professor of criminal justice, so anybody can love comics, right? And we were really excited to start this con now 4 years ago, a group of us who were friends in town who just really wanted to have something in our local community. And so we're about to have our 4th show on September 8th at the Breslin Center. I see a lot of our artists, those of you who are coming back, we're really excited to have you. If you've been in the Breslin Center, it's beautiful, totally renovated, and we're going to be on the concourse level in a big circle. We'll wander around in circles. It'll be awesome. But I wanted to tell you a little bit about what we do. So we are Capital City Comic Con C4, and really the 4 C's that we subscribe to are comics, creators, collectibles, and community. We believe very strongly in our local community here. We try to give back as much as we can to our community. We give a donation every year to the Capital Area Literacy Coalition because we believe comics are a great way to get kids reading, comics and graphic novels. I know that's how my children started reading. And look, there they are. Ryan has them all there for me. We are very creator focused at our event. We know a lot of you have been to Comic Cons, and I have as well, and a lot of them are really big and not very focused on the art itself. We are very focused on the comic art form. We have a lot of artists, a lot of local artists who come to our event. So we don't have a lot of what most call media guests. celebrities and things like that, because we want to really feature our local artists and the people who are doing really good work, and that's one of our missions. As I said, we are community driven. We make donations, and we also, for now the third year in a row, will offer $1,000 as part of the MSU Comic Studies Scholarship. So those of you who are in Dr. Clater's classes will be hearing about that soon. The deadline will be coming up this semester, but we're very happy to sponsor students who are working in comic art and then feature their work at our con. And there's Christy. Is Christy here today? Christy? No. Well, Christy was our winner last year. She'll be back again this year. So we really want to encourage young people to get involved in the study of comic art. And we do award one scholarship a year. Part of the scholarship is a booth at our con so that we can start these young artists off on the right foot. And of course, we try very hard to price our booths very reasonably so that other students might also want to show their work. We are happy to talk to anybody about that at any time. So there's Christy. This is what she designed for us last year. So this was, she submitted her application packet with a number of examples of comic art that she had created for classes. And then this was what we commissioned her to write as part of the scholarship, what we commissioned her to create. So then this forms the cover of our program for the year. We love it. We think it's beautiful. Every year we get such great work out of our students here at Michigan State. We're just very proud of our students. And these are some of the other features that come along with that. So not only $1,000 scholarship, a commemorative letter signed by me and certificate, very valuable, a dedicated table, and then all kinds of media shout outs to that person as well. Again, trying to get them started off on the right foot in their career. To apply, we'll be getting all of this material ready soon. Ryan and I have got the deadlines nailed down. Essentially, you have to be an MSU student to apply, so currently enrolled. And we'll be sending out the links, I'm sure, but we just have to have everything by April 15th. And on the webpage, there's more detail about what kinds of things you should submit in your package if you're interested in applying. And I will say that every year I've been so pleased with the number of strong quality applications we've gotten. It's been so hard to choose, but there's some really, really talented students here at Michigan State. So we'll be updating that webpage. I'm waiting for the comics forum to be over so Ryan can take a breath and we can now work on the next phase, which is our scholarship, but it's all available on our webpage. And I'll be around if anybody has questions. We will have a booth here tomorrow, so please stop by and say hello. And I think that's it. Thanks, Ryan.
Thanks, Christina. Yeah, that's a really exciting, I think, opportunity for MSU Comics students. So for the few of you I see in the audience, I strongly encourage you to apply. So a little earlier, I mentioned my role as the director of this event, but I can assure you that the Michigan State University Comics Forum would not look like it does without a lot of help from the MSU Comics Forum Core Committee. So please join me in thanking each of these folks with a round of applause as I mention their name. Webmaster Sharif Abu Saud, who is not in the audience, unfortunately. He is busy webmastering, but please give him a round of applause anyway. We hope you're watching the live stream. Our promotions coordinator, Jason Larson, who is also watching the live stream. Applause anyway. Next is our MSU Special Collections Comics Bibliographer, Randy Scott, who is also the curator of the Women Comics Professional exhibit down on the first floor and also associated with the MSU Comics Forum. Randy, could you stand up, please? Those of you who don't know, Randy Scott is also the man behind the largest public collection of comics in the world. It has been Randy's life work to build this collection, so Randy, thank you for making this invaluable resource for us. I think that deserves another round of applause. Our Artist Alley coordinator, Jade Jaycott, who has put together a fantastic group of artists for tomorrow. And our esteemed panel coordinator, Zach Cruzy. Let's give him a round of applause. Along with myself, we make up the MSU Comics Forum Core Committee, so please show these guys some gratitude for putting on a great show. Thank you. So next we have our esteemed keynote speaker, Lucy Knisley, who is a prolific cartoonist whose award-winning work focuses largely on autobiography, confessional comics, and travelogues. She attended the School of the Art Institute in Chicago, where she was a Merit Scholar, followed by the Center for Cartoon Studies, where she was a Diamond in the Rough Scholar, and earned her MFA in 2009. To date, her work has been published by several major publishers, including French Milk, by Simon & Schuster, Relish from First Second, the Macmillan Comics imprint, An Age of License, and Displacement, both of which were published by Fantagraphics Books, and something new, Tales from a Makeshift Bride, also from First Second. She also has a number of new works that are either freshly released or on the horizon, which I'm hoping we'll hear a little more about in today's presentation. So without further delay, please join me in welcoming our 2018 Michigan State University Comics Forum creator, keynote speaker, Lucy Knisley.
Thank you so much for being here tonight. It's Friday night. Thank you for coming to a comic book event. I really appreciate it. My name is Lucy Knisley. It's got a silent K. It's weird, like knife or knickerbocker. That's how it's pronounced. I live in Chicago. I've written and drawn 6 published graphic novels so far, mostly, like Ryan said, focused on my life, on food, being a woman, most recently having a baby. I also illustrate for some magazines. I do children's book illustrations, occasionally teach a workshop. I've worked for Marvel, for Boom Studios, and have been published in the New York Times. But I'm mainly a graphic novelist, which just means I like to make long comic books. So I'm going to start with a comics reading of a comic I drew specifically for this presentation. You are 5 years old. You can read, but writing is harder. For your birthday, you got a set of new markers, or crayons, or colored pencils, or you stole them from the neglected desk of an older sibling or a parent. Likewise, you came upon some paper. Maybe it's from a printer, the kind with perforated edges and a column of holes. You've been outside all day. Maybe it was in the warm sun, or maybe the deep, cold snow. Perhaps you were swimming until your lips turned blue. Or inside, watching a movie so good, you nearly had or did have an accident because you didn't want to leave to go to the bathroom. Maybe you arranged your toys into such a deep state of play that you were startled to be called away to the world without. Or you were listening to the gentle cadence of a parent reading a book that you cannot stop living within. In any case, you've seen something, experienced something. That something is within. You set your pencil to paper. Maybe the drawing looks right, maybe it doesn't quite, but the feeling is there to set it to paper, to free it from your brain out through your hand. We share this impulse from early childhood, or perhaps from even earlier. What I saw, how it felt, who I am, where I was, how it looked. The self-criticism and frustration will come later. Another kid will tell you your horse looks like a stupid poop with legs. Or a teacher will scold you for wasting your time drawing. And that will be where following this impulse might taper out for you. But until then, here it is. Someone will peer over your shoulder. You'll explain what it is on the paper. It will satisfy something in you that you were able to make this communication happen, that what you saw or felt or experienced is now shared, Someone saw this and knew, or tried to know, how to see through your eyes. So if you can recover from the stupid poop horse comment, which I'll argue is a lifelong process, and if you like fart sounds and punchlines and never outgrow that basic childhood impulse to combine words and drawings, perhaps you'll become a comic artist or a reader, or both if you're particularly lucky. After all, you could have been an international fashion icon. So, in case you haven't guessed, that's me. This book is Something Under the Bed is Drooling, which was Bill Watterson's second collection of strips from his Calvin and Hobbes series. If you have a kid in your life who's not yet been exposed to Calvin and Hobbes, you obviously know what your duty is. Of course, I'm partial to little blonde boys with stuffed tigers. I'm really proud of myself that I made it this far into my presentation without showing a picture of my kid. Kudos to me. I read a lot of comics, and as a professional comic artist, I can safely say that Calvin and Hobbes is a perfect comic. It's perfect in that it's the externalization of this inner world through childhood. You see through Calvin's eyes, through his imagination and experiences. It's jarring when Hobbes becomes inanimate, like that moment of play when you step outside and away from your imaginary world. The medium of comics is used to communicate lots of things, of course, but it's essentially founded on expressing the internal, which is why Calvin and Hobbes is so amazingly resonant. Whether those internal fantasies are about strength and speed, fan fiction about Norse mythology, musings on family or history, or something else that's true and honest and real. It's all about the author or the characters expressing something internal. So as much as I love Calvin and Hobbes and many other fictional comics, the main focus of my own work has been autobiographical, specifically memoir and travelogue. So my career is as much a product of luck and timing as anything else. I know it's considered extremely tired to make the generalization of comic books not just for kids anymore. Headlines like this are so overdone, of course. Graphic novels, fun new trend for adults. But I've always been fascinated with the relationship of the instinctive artistic storytelling of childhood and what that becomes for a lot of comic artists as comics. So obviously, comics are also for kids, because where else would adult comic readers and makers come from? So I'm going to read another short comic that I made a couple years ago about what I was like as a kid and a revelation I had that eventually turned me into a cartoonist. It's called Vanishing into My Head. When I'm alone, do other people stop being real? Maybe I'm not real, but I'm me. Why am I me and not someone else? Maybe I am someone else, and this is just pretend. Lucy is imaginary. Does that mean I'll stop being real? Maybe when I die. I must be real, because I know someday everyone dies, even me. But how can I know that they're real unless I get to be them? I don't even know what it's like to be me, really. I know, we'll all get on the train. This is so good. I hope I remember it so I can keep playing it tomorrow. I'll probably forget it. I always forget stuff. And then it's like I didn't even think it, that this whole thing never existed. I wish I had a tape recorder for my brain. I am going to record this. I'm going to push record. Boop. I am looking at this and remembering it. I'm me, but I'm also the me in the future, remembering this and also being me now. There. Phew. Here, you can be this guy and I'll be the baby. I love Cody. He and I are the same. But I guess we're not really. He's thinking different stuff from me right now. I love you, baby. I love milk. Come on, Tink, let's go get Tiger Lily. Like this. This is me. I am in this. Nobody else. I am not Pinocchio or Peter Pan or Pooh or Mom. I am me. Nobody can hear this stuff, and I can't say it right, and I can't even understand it or remember it. I'm scared there will never be anyone in here besides me. I'm going to draw a picture of me and Cody. That's me, and that's Cody, and we're on a boat. Hey, that's you, and that's me, and we're on a boat. Yeah. So I still use comics for the same purposes and to achieve the same results as you saw in that last comic. I think of writing true comics as a form of time travel to connect with current, previous, and future selves and to communicate and understand more about how it is to be another person. I always like drawing great pictures of myself in this presentation. I always like drawing stories about my life ever since I was a very fashionable young person. It's pretty easy to trace my interests back to early childhood. I made a lot of little self-copied and stapled zines. This one is about food. It's Lucy's Cookbook for Pies. Cooking is easy. I like it. And then there's pumpkin, cinnamon, I think. Anyway, so that's my cookbook for pies. I made a lot of books about my life. This is my best friend, Jane. She was really flattered by that portrait of her. And I made a lot of comics about cats because I was obsessed. Did you know that kittens can never run out of cuteness? They were very informative books. So now I'm an adult and I make a lot of comics about food and my life and cats. So obviously I've come a long way from there. It's my cat, Linny. So I was born in 1985, which made me part of a transitional generation. We started our childhoods without the internet and came to adulthood in the thick of it. So my adolescent years went from don't talk to strangers to try not to mention your home address when talking to strangers. So comics and newspapers were also making the shift more towards the internet. Graphic novels were making the jump to mainstream publishing. So I got into making comics right when the internet allowed people to suddenly have access to an enormous audience for their work. And I know we've always been a culture of voyeurs and oversharers, but the internet, of course, has enabled this ability to such an extent that it literally changed the way that we interact with each other and connect. So obviously it's given voice to marginalized people, artists who'd never have gotten published or represented or hung in galleries, but who blow up online, and then also to kids like me who are able to reach an audience that indicated that making personal work can matter to people. And I love online comics, I love print comics, I love that the internet has allowed so many new ways to incorporate the image and the written word and this graphic narrative storytelling. But as a kid, I thought I'd have to choose between two professions. I saw artist and writer as feasible adult professions somehow, but I overlooked cartoonist as an ideal way to combine these two jobs that I envisioned having to choose between. So I chose artist because I thought that's where the money is. Yeah. So I enrolled in a fine arts painting program. I wanted to be a painter, and because that's the most lucrative and modern form of art. So I went to the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, and I realized like my first week that I wanted to make comics. Unfortunately, the school was a very fine arts school and didn't consider comics to be in their curriculum. So they had no classes, nothing for comics. So I ended up having to cobble together an education somehow for myself. Also, I had gone to 4 different high schools before I got to college, bounced around from various schools, and by then I had a lot of social anxiety, and I'd hit college starting in this new city and like couldn't talk to anyone. So I had a lofted bed in my dorm room that I just didn't leave except to go to classes. And I would sit up in this like cramped little coffin bed space drawing comics all day because that was the only way that I felt like I could keep myself from going totally crazy. I was super shy. I couldn't talk to my classmates. I felt ridiculous in this new place. So I threw myself into my work, started making comics that I wasn't getting class credit for. So I started, someone, a kind friend, encouraged me to submit them to the school newspaper. So I started doing that. And this was one of my early comics. I'm sorry for the low resolution. If any of you are starting out making comics, please scan them at high resolution because this is what I got from the beginning of my career. So I started out making these comics. I was reaching out through these comics to try and connect with the people around me in a way that I couldn't face to face. I was putting them online. I was putting them in the newspaper. They were these full-page stories just crammed with anxiety and feelings, just I was inspired by Winsor McCay, actually, who made these full-page newspaper comics that were about dreams. So I thought, if someone's going to make a comic about the liminal space between being awake and dreaming and sort of the fantasy of the inner world, I wanted to express the anxieties of my inner life through comics in the same way, in this very immersive, full-page comic. So that's what, that was a format that really appealed to me. The internal, externalized. So I started publishing these comics online and in the newspaper, and I started hearing back from readers, people who'd read my work and connected to it. And this was a huge light bulb moment for me, that I could make work that spoke to people, and that I could make work that not only made me feel less alone in the world, but made other people feel less alone in the world. So then my first big comic project came when I was about to graduate from art school. And I had this 4-year art degree and no idea how I was going to make money. I wanted to make comics, but who knew if that was going to be a career? I had no idea. So I was in this very unhinged transitional state. My mother was about to turn 50, and we were sort of reconnecting as adults. So she was in this big transitional state. She is a professional chef, and we've always bonded over foods, particularly French food. So she came up with a brilliant plan to go to Paris for 6 weeks, rent a cheap kind of flea bag apartment, and just live there and bond over the food and the art and kind of wrestle with the things that we were trying to transition to. This came about, I started keeping a travelogue during this trip. It was a very, very profound experience for me, both to reconnect with my mother and to try and understand myself as an adult and grapple with the anxieties of going out in the world with a fine arts degree. So this travelogue became more than just sort of what I saw and ate, and more about a relationship in transition and a period of uncertainty kind of captured on paper. I used photographs for part of it, and that was very intentional. I loved the idea of telling a true story and then holding up photographic evidence to try and kind of match that true story. I'm one of those people that when I read a book, I'm perpetually flipping back to the author photo to see who's writing this and what they look like, and it gives me this visual connection to the author. So I wanted to include photographs as a way to kind of flip back and forth between my reality and the camera's reality. So it was a very intense experience of tasting the food, and the food in particular made the experience really vivid for me. And I grew up with a chef for a mother, so tastes, flavors, smells are all things that really anchor me in my memories and my past. So this was my first published book, French Milk, which came out in 2008. And after this book came out, I really latched onto the idea of comics as a way to tell stories through sense memories, through the flavors and smells that I had experienced. So I love that comics allows you to not only read what the author remembers, but also to sort of see it through their eyes. And I wanted to add another layer to that and allow readers to have a sense memory and make it a third layer of having a sensory experience with comics. So someone who's obsessed with food, I thought I should start there with my childhood and growing up in these professional kitchens in New York City when I was a kid. And this is a book I love called Images a la carte by Klaus Oldenburg and Kuzi van Bergen. The two of them were partners. You might know Klaus Oldenburg. He's an artist. He makes these giant sculptures, many of which are food related. There's like a giant ice cream cone. Anyway, the two of them were partners, and they were big foodies. They liked to go out and dine together and have wonderful meals. But later in her life, Kuzi developed strong food allergies and couldn't eat the things that they used to enjoy together. So Klaus would sketch the foods in these really beautiful, structural, kind of architectural ways almost, and so that she could look at these beautiful pictures and appreciate his renderings of them through what she called gastronomy of the eye. And I love this idea that you can look at someone's drawn interpretation of food and have kind of a sensory flavor reaction to it. So this is one of the books that inspired me to bring that to comics. So I started drawing my own stories about growing up with a mother who is a professional chef, and I used to be allowed to just come to professional working kitchens back in the 80s and 90s. I guess that was okay then. And just sit on the floor and color, and people would give me little scraps of things. And it was a really interesting childhood for me in that regard. So I started telling these stories and recounting them. And I was trying to bring flavor and scent memories into the work and make these multi-sensory comics. So each of the stories was then followed by a recipe for a food that was mentioned in the chapter previous, which I also love the idea of comics recipes because I can never follow along on Food Network shows. I'm always just "Ugh." And I also find it difficult as a visual learner to follow along in a lot of recipe books. It's just these long columns of texts with unfamiliar terms in a lot of cases. So I found comics to be this really great way to teach people how to cook things because it's sort of a bridge between reading a recipe and watching someone perform the tasks slowly so that you can kind of understand what the hands do to create the food. So these stories and recipes all came together in my second book, Relish, My Life in the Kitchen, which came out in 2013. After Relish, I had a little more stability in my career, but it was a year until the book came out. I'd finished the book, but it wasn't coming out yet. So I didn't know what I wanted to do next, whether the book was going to be accepted in the world, whether it was going to be a flop. So I was kind of back in this transitional state where I didn't know where my career was going. So I was also a 20-something without a family or a job that kept me in one particular place. So I took a lot of trips and honed my traveloguing skills. I just took every opportunity to travel. I really love travelogue as a format, as evidenced by my first book. But in this in-between place before Relish came out, I was just able to do a lot of things that I would not be able to do now, for example. I tagged along on one of my dad's business trips to South Korea, and that was really fun. I took a job as a teen travel abroad counselor. That was less fun and a little more of a challenge, but I leapt at the opportunity and wound up getting to go to Florence for that. And then I took a job for a food magazine that sent me to Tanzania to write about the food. And I went to write about the food and came back with 50 pages about looking at elephants. So I didn't end up publishing a lot of the work that I made in this crazy year because a lot of it was just elephants instead of a larger story. So there wasn't a lot more to it than elephants. I found, as someone who's done travelogue quite a bit, it's important to recognize the difference between a good time and a good story and what's worthy of publication. And I've always used comics as a way to make sense of the world and my place in it, but not everything that I regurgitate onto the paper is worthy of publication, obviously. So I know that autobiographical comics are not everyone's bag. I love them, I read them a lot, and I think I think that a lot of people struggle within the scope of autobiographical comics to find what they might appreciate within that realm. I categorize the different autobiocomics are diary, travelogue, and memoir. So diary, of course, is straight confessional records of day-to-day life, curated only in the most basic sense. Travelogue is sort of the bridge in between these two, curated in the context of a trip or an event in your life. And memoir, of course, is curated in a larger scope of your everyday life. So my car broke down versus my car broke down and I was stranded in Prague, or one time long ago, my car broke down and here's how it affected the rest of my life. So I found working within the medium of autobiographical storytelling to be a wonderful way to feel connected with the world and with myself at a certain point in time, even though I may cringe to look back at quite a bit of the work that I published previous to now. I'm still glad I captured her in ink on paper. So in the midst of my aimless traveloguing period, I was invited to go to Norway to a comic convention where I was asked to be a special guest. It was a really amazing thing for me. I'd never been asked to go to an international comic convention before, and they offered to buy my airfare. So I said, great, I'm taking every opportunity to travel, so I think I will travel around cheaply and see some friends and have some adventures while I'm there. So I went to Norway, and then I went to Sweden and wound up having a love affair with a Swedish mathematician who lived in a commune outside of Stockholm. That was cool. I went to Bonn in France and met up with one of my oldest friends who had fallen into the wine industry and got to taste like 60-year-old wine and the caves that it was stored in, and that was really cool. I also stayed in a weird old house populated by nudists who threw crazy parties, and also my mom was there. So this ended up turning into my next book called An Age of License, which it's a pretty weird book, very strange experiences. So this became more of a collection, more than a collection of experiences. It was, again, about another transitional state, flailing and falling and finding and privilege and luck and romance. So this was my next book. Shortly after I came back from that trip, I agreed to accompany my 95 and 96-year-old grandparents on a senior group trip aboard a cruise ship. So I hadn't spent a ton of time with my grandparents recently, and I didn't know what was going on with them fully, but they had each declined quite a bit in health. And it turns out that they couldn't take this trip alone. So I, as someone who didn't have a family holding me there, a job holding me there, said, I'll go with them and I will make sure they get through this trip alive. But I did not have any experience with elder care. I just loved my grandparents. So I had no idea what I was getting myself into. And it was an extremely jarring experience. I was far from home, literally at sea. And I had to learn fast about their limitations and what they were capable of. So I brought along my grandfather's war memoir. He self-published his war memoir a number of years ago, and I brought it along as a sort of conversation starter. I wanted to talk to them more about this period of their lives that they remembered so vividly, even though they sort of couldn't remember who I was at all times. So I read it every night before bed, and the stories from my grandfather's war memoir started to creep into my own sketchbook. And so it was this really interesting juxtaposition of me trying to keep my grandparents alive during the day, and then watching my grandfather trying to stay alive during the war at night. So this was a difficult trip for me. I kind of sought solace in my sketchbook, and I think it took a few years off my life to go, but I'm really glad that I went because it was their last trip ever before they passed away, and my last chance to really spend some time with them, even if they didn't really recognize me or know me for much of it. So this became my next book, which is called Displacement. So I consider these two books to be kind of paired together. They both came out very close to one another from the same publisher. I feel like this is really representative not only of my own 20s, but of a lot of people's experiences kind of enjoying the youth and freedom that they love so much, but coming to grips with the mortality and age and realities of their aging family members that a lot of people go through. So soon after my year of travel, my cute ex-boyfriend came to visit me where I was living in New York City. So he and I had split up 3 years earlier because he didn't want to have kids and I did, and he went to grad school and I went and moved to New York for a little while, and we remained close friends, but we just sort of called things off from there. But over the 3 years that we were apart, he met a lot of people who had kids and sort of started to change his mind on the subject. So he showed up at my house with a ring that he had stolen from his mother's jewelry box. So this was a person I still loved, and I said yes. I agreed to marry him. So I had never considered marriage before this, really, and I was kind of thrust into the deep end of the engagement zone. I didn't know what I was getting into. The wedding industry was not something I was familiar with at all. I didn't know what happens to your mother when you get engaged. Fair warning. I didn't really know what I wanted, although I settled on an anti-capitalistic secular marriage of equals without yucky sexist BS, which is pretty much impossible, but you know. So I did a lot of research to try and figure out what this whole wedding thing was about, and I did a lot of research into the traditions and the superstitions and why we do the things that we do. A lot of people don't know what the garter toss is all about. It's completely barbaric and ridiculous. It comes from a time when the bride and groom were expected to consummate the marriage right after the ceremony, and the guests would actually help to rip the clothes off of their body to speed them in their haste to the bedroom chamber. And this is a throwback to then when the bride would throw her garter off to go consummate the marriage. Super gross. The reason why we don't see each other before the wedding is because back in the day when marriages were arranged, it was feared that they would totally split into a bunker if they saw the other person and decided not to do it. The carried over the threshold thing is to protect you from demons that come up from the ground, I guess. I don't know why the groom would not be got by the demons, but whatever. So there was a lot of really interesting, very sexist, odd things that have to do with the marriage ceremonies. So I was able to understand why these particular traditions happen, and then I could choose whether or not I wanted to give any power to those particular things. I did not do the garter toss. That was super gross. So this became my 5th book, Something New, which is about the wedding industry and my own feelings about marriage. We did get married. It all happened. My mother and I are still on speaking terms. So as we know from the kissing rhyme, first comes love, then comes marriage, and then... So 20 months ago, I had this kid who is very extremely awesome. And despite the fact that he's obviously the most amazing person that's ever existed in the entire universe, getting pregnant, being pregnant, and giving birth was the worst. I had multiple miscarriages. I had to have uterine surgery. I developed preeclampsia and gallstones, and despite being healthy and young, almost died in childbirth. When my enormous baby basically Kool-Aid manned out of me. It's a medical illustration. But for serious, here's a photo of me in a coma after I had an emergency C-section, during which I had seizures, bled 2/3 of my body under the table, and nearly had to have an emergency hysterectomy to survive. So the transition to parenthood, being somewhat jarring for every single person on Earth, was also pretty deeply traumatic for me and my family. So I've always been interested in women's health. Actually, before I decided to become a comic artist, or an artist in general, I was really interested in becoming a midwife. So I consider myself to be well-informed, and I consider myself to be very invested in pregnancy. So almost every aspect of this was like a total revelation to me. One particularly awful revelation I discovered in my research was that my experience is painfully common. In the US, more mothers die in childbirth than in any other developed nation. It's almost 6 times worse for women of color. It's ridiculous. The reason I know that is that, like most people, when I experience something traumatic and widespread, I want to know more. I want to tell the story so that I feel less alone and that others going through this also feel less alone. So I did a lot of research after my son was born. So I've spent the last year studying and researching and drawing out and reliving this horrible ordeal while I wrote and drew the thing. Did a lot of research into the medicalization and history of women's health and childbirth, and discovered some very strange things and very horrible things. In general, we pretty much, up into the modern age, believed that women were just a vessel for the tiny men that lived in men's balls. So that's cool. So I made a book about pregnancy, about getting pregnant, being pregnant, and giving birth. And this is an event that every single person on Earth experiences from at least one perspective. But most of the writing on it is instructional or scientific. And we have far more literature on war, on business, than we do on the transitional state of life's creation. So we have hundreds of times more scholarly books about reproduction written by men than by women who've actually experienced pregnancy. And this is something that drives me crazy. So I really wanted to make this book. This is an important book for me. I just finished drawing it in November. It comes out next year. It's called Kid Gloves. It's a story about our origins, where babies come from, and women's health and history and biology and transitional periods of becoming a parent, which, much like the horse poop comment, is a lifelong process, I think. So this book has not been seen by the public at all, and I didn't fully check with my publisher before including some of it in this presentation, so everybody shush. But I'm going to read my favorite chapter of the book, which is actually the only chapter in the book that wasn't written fully by me, because I was in a coma at the time. So I used my husband's notes of the event and adapted them into this chapter of the book. This is him. My husband, John, as a little bit of a background, is a UX designer, and he insists that he's not a writer. And he was totally freaked out and horrified that I was going to use his writing in my published work. But he knows what he got into when he married me, so whatever. Also, it's literally the best chapter in the book, so he might have to write all of my work from now on. The beginning is me, and then it's him. So straight to the most dramatic chapter in the whole book, though please still buy it when it comes out. Here is Birth Story. Here is the last thing I remember from my son's birth. The baby. The following portion of this book is written from John's perspective because I do not remember it. Lucy is taken into surgery, and I'm left in the waiting room, wringing my hands. One of the nurses comes back in. "You're John? Here, put these on and come with me." I walk in right as a doctor is carrying a baby from Lucy's lower half to a side room. Lucy looks a little yellow and out of it. We talk while she's still being operated upon. "Did you see him? Is he okay?" "I don't know." "Would you like to meet your son? Come with me." "Go, please." I lay eyes on him for the first time and break down sobbing. I rejoin Lucy with him in my arms. I hold him up against Lucy's arm and face. "Hello, sweetie. I love you." "Beep, beep, beep. Love you." Lucy turns yellower. The docs seem concerned. "So much." They take the baby away for some tests. "And you can come with me." Where'd he go? At some point, I get taken to a nearby room where I wait for a long time. The doctor comes in, finally. Lucy had what appeared to be a seizure. We're having a hard time getting her bleeding under control. It could be any number of things. Her uterine resection, the size of the baby, the long labor. 40 hours. I call Lucy's mom, who's in the main hospital waiting area, and fill her in. They don't really know what's going on. Oh, God. The doctor comes back. We're still trying to control the bleeding. I have to discuss a possibility with you. If we can't get the bleeding to stop, we may have to perform an emergency hysterectomy. After a long time waiting, she's stable, but she's on a breathing tube and she's headed to the surgical ICU. She's lost 3 liters of blood. That's about half the blood in her body. I meet up with our parents in the waiting room and take them to the nursery to meet the baby. Then we head to the ICU to see Lucy, but when we arrive, the ward is locked. Hello? Is anyone there? After a while, a nurse finally comes in. We're settling her into her room. I'll let you know when you can come in. We wait for another hour. We're finally led into the room. Lucy is unconscious. She has a breathing tube strapped to her face, heart monitors on her chest, 5 IVs in her arm, restraints so she doesn't mess with the breathing tube if she wakes up. A respiratory technician comes in to get the CO2 in Lucy's blood under control. They change out her IV to fix her high levels, or was it low levels, of potassium. They listen to her breathing to test how much fluid she has in her lungs. Neurologists come in to examine her to try to discern the cause of her seizures. The working theory is eclampsia. It was. I stay up all night in the room. Lucy is still unconscious in the morning. She's on a magnesium drip to treat her eclamptic symptoms. Later, she starts coming around. Can you open your eyes for me, Lucy? Flutter. Can you make a fist? Twitch. Okay, good. That's good? She gets an EKG and a CT scan, and they glue a bunch of sensors to her head for an EEG. Took forever to get the glue off. My sister Erica drives in from Milwaukee to visit us and starts crying when she sees me. The breathing tube comes out in the afternoon, but Lucy can barely talk. The magnesium drip makes Lucy really out of it, but it has to stay in for 24 hours. My glasses? But she manages to ask, "Can I see him?" And for the first time, Lucy gets to hold him. So, the story continues in kid gloves. Please buy it. It's out February 26, 2019. I know it's going to be forever. My kid will be 3 by then. So, I want to thank you all so much for your kind attention at this presentation. I really appreciate it. This is one of my first presentations and public appearances since my son was born and since I nearly died. So I really appreciate such a wonderful crowd, such a wonderful audience, and I would be very honored if you had any questions. I'd be very happy to answer them.
If there are any questions, we've got some microphones scattered around the room. If you wouldn't mind stepping up to them, that would be fantastic.
I know the microphone is kind of intimidating.
So you kind of skated around this, Lucy, but you're doing autobio, and life, you know, when you take sections of your life and you just sort of start telling people, it can often be boring. And you have to make a story about something true. So how do you kind of reconcile those two different demands? The making of a story that sort of, in order to be interesting to your readers, has to follow a kind of arc, versus being true to the facts of your experience.
Question. Thank you, Diana. I think that is partly why I like to subcategorize autobiographical work because I think of diary comics as interesting, but they don't have that arc. And while it's interesting to get this slice of life perspective of somebody's day-to-day life, I kind of think of them a little bit more as practice. I started out making diary comics. I think a lot of people start out making diary comics. I still do it from time to time, but it is one of those things that I think really helps inform longer pieces of work and inform your storytelling later on and develop this muscle memory of here's what happened, here's why I think it's important to tell you why it happened. And there are a lot of boring autobiographical comics. There are a ton. And they have their redeeming qualities, mostly that they are good practice for telling longer stories. And for myself, you know, people sometimes come up to me at conventions and they're like, I know your cat's name, that's really weird, right? And I'm like, no, it's awesome. I'm really flattered that you were able to remember that. And like, let's talk about my cat. I want to talk about my cat, let's go. So people often ask me, you know, like, is it strange to expose certain parts of your life in this way? And I'm always very clear that my work is curated. It's not everything that happens to me. It's not my whole inner monologue the entire time. It's things that I think would be relatable to people who are reading the work. And that's where diary comics don't have to do that. They just have to tell you what happened. And I think that memoir comics do. They have to have this story that people can relate to in some way. And that's why I have to make those categorizations, because I think that a lot of people who say that they don't like autobio or they think that it's boring are used to reading diary comics, and they're like, I don't want to hear about this person's trip to the grocery store. I remember when I was in graduate school, I showed James Kochalka the early manuscript of French Milk. And he very kindly read it, and he very kindly came back, and the only thing he said to me was, nobody wants to read about what you ate. Doing comics about food is cheating. And I was like, oh, okay, this revered autobiographical comic artist is telling me that this thing that really matters to me is not worthy of being put into a comic. And I remember coming away from that and being like, everything I know is wrong and bad. And then turning around and making an entire graphic novel about food. So I think the distinction is that, like, when he writes about food, he doesn't really care about it. He's just like, I made a stew today. Whereas when I wrote about food, it was in the context of my childhood and this unusual experience I had growing up with a chef who's a mom. And food means so much to me that it came through in the writing, and it became this relatable thing of some passion that you had since early childhood. And that's, I think, the distinction that you were asking about. Does that answer your question? Good, thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, when you're doing your travelogue comics, how detailed are the sketches you're doing while you're on your trip and the notes you take as well?
It depends on the trip. I've learned that not every trip is a good travelogue time. When I'm traveling with friends or something, for example, it's very difficult because you have to spend time with friends. And traveling with people that also like to travelogue or journal is really important to have that time set aside. So, for example, the trip that I took to Norway and to travel around Europe, those drawings were pretty quick and pretty sketchy, and I finished a lot of it when I got home. But the book that I did about going on the cruise ship with my grandparents was like done when I got home, because I would put them to bed and, like, shaking, I would go back to my windowless cell and I would sit there and just vomit this out onto the paper and, like, get all of these thoughts and feelings out of my body so that I could sleep. So that was a really motivated trip for me, and I came back with, like, a finished book practically. So it really depends on the trip. Again, this is a muscle memory thing that when I started out, I couldn't work as fast as I do now. I'm much quicker and much better at drawing on, like, a moving train than I was when I first started out. But I'm never totally done with a book when I get back. I rely a great deal on notes, on quick sketches, and even on photographs that I take in order to reference back to them later on.
Thank you.
So, I have a lot of respect for autobiocomics. I journal all the time, but when it comes to like me making my own journal comics, like I find it hard to actually do that. Like I write in journals all the time. I take notes to myself all the time, but when it comes to sitting down to actually like draw it out, like there's something that gets lost in that process. Like the addition to having to draw over my journal, like it seems to create like it almost like slows down the time it takes for me to get my thoughts out.
Yep.
So I wanted to know if there was any way to sort of remove bits and pieces of that process in order to actually capture what I want to capture when I try to autobiocomic.
I don't know if this is going to help, but I ran into a very similar problem. Also separating out this feeling of disconnect between my character, basically, that I was drawing and myself, and I had to make that distinction in order to protect my psyche and to protect myself in a way, so that when people go online and say, "What a spoiled, selfish brat," I'm like, "You don't know me, you know my character." Like, yes, also that was me, but so that's part of it. That just it took me years to make that distinction, but I also would recommend starting from the drawing, because when you start from the drawing and then move to the words, I think it manages to sort of show a lot that you don't need to tell later on, and that helps me a lot with my journaling and feeling comfortable sharing it by trying to say as much as I possibly can with the image before moving to the words.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. Good luck.
I know there are a lot of comic artists who are parents, but I think that it's really special to hear from somebody who's a mother then, because we hear from a lot of fathers, but not so much from the women who end up having to like kind of put their lives on hold for a little bit. So I kind of wondered what it was like for you to, having been a cartoonist first and then shifted into motherhood, but you still are obviously producing plenty of work, so I didn't know what the struggles were of that or how you bounce back into that.
Thank you. I know there's all these comics dads out there that I really admire, but it's a different scene, and all of these women that I came of age revering, these people that I love and have known for decades now, these really amazing comic artists, women chose not to have children, and that is incredible, and they're incredible artists and very accomplished, but there was no one I could look to and say, I want to do that. And I think that's changing a lot right now. Sarah Glidden, one of the most amazing comic artists working right now, is pregnant. She's about to have her first kid, and she's making comics about it. And I just think that it's so profound. There's this online magazine called Mother Magazine, Mother, that's all, it's a lot of writing, but it also has a huge, amazing, incredible comic section, mostly written by women, talking about their experiences of motherhood. And it's just incredible. Like I said in my presentation, we have so much more writing on business and war than we do on the creation of life. And this is something that is so profound and everybody experiences. And I'm shocked that we haven't branched out into this more yet. So I appreciate it. I'm very lucky. I've been able to go back to work. I work from home. I went back to work after my son was 12 weeks old, and we have a part-time nanny that comes in 3 days a week, so I get to work 3 days a week and like hear him in the other room, and he comes to visit me like 50 times a day, and so people are always like, "All your work is about your kid now," and I'm like, I'm in the house with him all day long. I don't know what to tell you. He's there, and it's one of those things that like. I struggle with still because before I had kids, I was like, ugh, all this person talks about is their kid now. And I'm like, that's what's my deal now. So I'm kind of like, bring it. I'm a mom. And I love it. He's such an inspiration. Before I had him, I was really worried that I was like, this is the end of my career. All of the comic artist women that I revere are childless, and I don't have anywhere to look. And what's happened instead is that I started making comics about my son and about early parenthood and pregnancy, and I found this incredible new audience of parents who were able to connect with this new work that I'm making. In the same way that when I made comics about food, it wasn't just comic artists connecting with it, it was people who love food. And now I have branched out into this amazing, amazing world of parenthood and people who were in need of something like this and wanted to be able to read comics about being a parent and being a mother. And I think that's so awesome, and I love it. And it's a total crazy, weird Pandora's box of insanity, but it's great fodder for comics, and I hope my son forgives me one day.
Yeah, thanks for giving us somebody to look to then.
Thank you.
Lucy, we've been talking about your work as if it's kind of straight autobio, but one of the things I really think is most distinctive about it are the digressions. Like, so autobio, then a recipe, and then, or your story, but then you change voices to your grandparents' story, or just pretty straight research in the, in the wedding book. It's very nonfiction. So I guess I want to hear you talk about the impulse to digress
Sure,
away from
thank you.
autobio.
I think that's related to what I was talking about in French Milk when I was using photographs, which I use in almost all my books. I utilize photographs as this way to kind of step out of my perspective and show something that's captured by the camera instead. And like I said, my favorite chapter in my new book is written by John. And this is something that appeals to me so much because it's a way of talking about the truth without just constantly spouting it out of my own mind. The recipes were something that they were beloved family recipes that I knew by heart and was able to share with people. And I felt like it wasn't a recipe. It was something I was sharing from my childhood. So it made perfect sense to include it. And I love that dichotomy. I love flipping between, okay, this is what the author is saying and this is what reality is saying. And having this ability to immerse yourself fully in a book, but also to be like, oh, I remember when I was eating elotes and they were so delicious. And so you have your own kind of sense memory and experience parallel to reading mine. And I love that. I just love that we can all sort of have these layered experiences reading comic books together. I think it's really fun. And the research is all also a palate cleanser. My own story, it's only one perspective, and I really wanted to, especially with this most recent book about women's health, I really wanted to talk about the history of women's health and how we don't learn this stuff in sex ed. And I came to this reading every book about pregnancy and being interested in it since I was a kid, and I still was totally blindsided. And this was something that I couldn't believe no one had ever told me these things. I couldn't believe no one had ever talked about J. Marion Sims to me before in sex ed or in a history class. And I don't know why it's not taught in schools. I don't know why it's not taught in birthing classes. People go to these birthing classes. They're weeks long. And no one ever gets into the history of these things and like why you should want to have a vaginal birth over a C-section. They just say like, it's better. They don't tell you why. They don't tell you the history of it. Like, it's crazy to me that this stuff isn't talked about. So likewise, it's crazy to me that a lot of people sort of come of age and they don't know a recipe. And I want to help. I want to show these things. I want to share them. I want people to know how totally nuts women's history is, women's biological history is. So. Anybody?
Hi, practical. Do you want to go first, please? Practical question here. This is a dad question. How difficult is it to make a living as a graphic novelist? I mean, what's the dental plan like?
I'm very, very lucky that my husband has a great dental plan, which is one of those things that like I've been incredibly lucky. He's a UX designer with a tutoring company called Wisant. Little plug there. If any of you have kids and are looking for a tutor, go to wisant.com. Anyway, and I've been very lucky. Before we got married, I was on the Vermont free health insurance for a while. I've had to pay for government health insurance on my own for a long time. But this is one of the things that I talk about in my book about having a kid that saved my life. I mean, I was hospitalized for 2 weeks and without that insurance, so it is one of those really huge struggles as a comic artist to make that work, to make parenthood work, to afford to have a nanny 3 days a week and to afford to pay for your medical and your kids' medical expenses. And I've been really lucky. My husband and I make it work together. And for me, I have years where I sign 3 book deals and I make more than him. And then I have a year where I'm making the books that I sign the deal and I make like a fraction of what he makes. So it's really uneven, which is not great for parenthood. It's not ideal. But I'm lucky that I've gotten to a point in my career where I can kind of gauge how long it takes me to make a book and sort of make it to the next contract in plenty of time. I've also balanced that with teaching, with making appearances like this, and with doing illustration work. So I'm kind of spinning a bunch of plates, but I make it work. And I think that a lot of the comic artist parents that I talk to do similar things. They balance it with teaching in order to get the health insurance.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hi. I was curious about what influences your art style. Looking through some of the covers you were showing on some of your books, I see a lot of European influence, and I wondered if you were looking at any European comics while you traveled.
Oh yeah, I got to go to Angoulême. It was great. I grew up reading Tintin and Asterix and Obelix. I totally loved those comics as a kid, along with Calvin and Hobbes and Archie. So that was my wheelhouse when I was a kid. And as I got older, I discovered a lot more women comic artists like Alison Bechdel and Linda Barry, who are huge influences of mine. And let's see, who else do I love? I came of age in the LiveJournal era, where I was friends with up-and-comers like Erica Moen and Raina Telgemeier, Vera Brascal, Maris Wicks, all of these really incredible women who are fabulous comic artists now, who super influenced me. Just sort of, we all influenced each other, and I was really, really lucky. R.I.P. LiveJournal.
Thank you very much.
Sure.
As someone who has been reading your stuff since the LiveJournal days and remembers when your Instagram was very cat-focused, I'm curious, how's your cat handling your son?
She is so patient with him. It's awesome. She's also she's 13 now, so she's like, she's too tired to, like, I think she would run away if she wanted to get up. But he's good. He like knows gentle and he goes soft. But the other day he went, "Here comes the steamroller," and just so that wasn't her favorite game. She's doing great though. She's still kicking. We just found out she's got a kidney problem and she hates her new kidney food, and I just made a comic about it online. But yeah, I know, I wish sometimes people write me and they're like, "Too much baby, more cat," and I'm like, "I'm sorry." She doesn't do much anymore. She's very old and like sleepy, and but they're really cute together.
I had one more question. So you speak on this concept of using comics work to connect or reconnect with past and present and future versions of yourself, and I really like that. That's really dope. But my question is, like, how do you retread difficult or heavy moments and like difficult territory without burning out or without getting to a point where you are kind of like re-experiencing those negative emotions? Like how do you?
Oh, it sucks. It sucks. It fully sucks. I did this comic a while ago. I had a really traumatic miscarriage before I had my son, and it was like painful and sad and just all around the worst. And I took some time and recovered and started writing about it. And when I wrote about this horrible experience, I could not believe the response. So many people had gone through this. This happens 1 in every 4 pregnancies end in miscarriage, and like it's such a taboo subject that people don't talk about. And it's one of those things that you can only really recover from it when you hear other stories of people talking about it and recovering from it. And so I realized that making this comic was helping a lot of people and helping me to feel less alone because these people had experienced something like that. So I think the act of sharing these traumatic experiences can be really helpful. psychologically. I don't reread a lot of my older traumatic work. And for my son's birth, I was able to distance myself a little bit from it by using my husband's perspective on it, not only because I don't remember it, but because it was such a horrible thing to have to write and draw and read that I was like, I don't want to talk about this. I want to talk about it from his perspective. And that's the first time that I've ever been able to like put that distance there, and it was really helpful, frankly. So for certain things, you can also turn to your friends and loved ones to kind of talk about these things. You can use a character that is representative of you, but not necessarily you, to kind of try and distance yourself. And I think that these things can be really, really healing. I've found so much healing through making my own comics about traumatic events, and I recommend it.
Thank you.
Sure.
Let's give Lucy a round of applause. So just a quick announcement, Lucy will be back tomorrow, one floor down on the third floor of the west wing of the library here, and she'll be at a table from 11 to 5 p.m. And we also have Diana Schutz, who will be giving our scholar keynote speech tomorrow, along with a bunch of panel discussions and an artist alley of several dozen creators. So I hope you'll all come back tomorrow for some more free events associated with the MSU Comics Forum. Thank you so much for coming.